Hey everybody, my name is Nick Ravel and I play viola, and I created DragonScales, my 3-octave scale and arpeggio audio play-along system in all keys for violin, viola, and cello. You can get them from the link in the description. I use them pretty much every day and I find them incredibly helpful for targeting pitch and rhythm. So far in this series, we've covered a lot of topics including basic scales, advanced scales, arpeggios, getting creative with the audio play-alongs, and even dipping our toes into the world of improvisation. You can check all those videos out in this playlist, but today we're going to be talking about double stops. Double stops can be tricky, they can be scary for us, especially under pressure. So I'm going to tell you why I think they're tricky and difficult, and how to work on them so that they are less tricky, more approachable. If you've never played a double stop in your life, do keep watching because there are ways that you can do some of these exercises as well. So, hit the like button, subscribe, and let's jump right in. Most playing on our instruments is done one finger at a time. And it's still tricky. We still have to listen for the intonation. We still have to feel balance in our body. We still have to breathe, because if you don't, you die. And we still have to think about the sound that we want to use. All of that times 2 is why I think double stops are tricky. It's literally twice the amount of information we have to deal with. And therefore it takes twice as long at least to practice it. But I think it's really important because, as I mentioned in the arpeggios video, we string players often think horizontally, meaning from one note to the next, because our bow lends itself to sustained playing, and a lot of composers use our instrument sounds to make melodies. Melodies and counter melodies are often just one note at a time, whereas instruments like piano, guitar, harp, all those mallet instruments can play a lot of notes at the same time, so they can sort of have access to a harmonic language that is sometimes difficult for us. Playing double stops puts us not only into a harmonic context where we're hearing the whole stack, but also a horizontal context where we're still trying to make melodies, but with possibly 2 melodies or a melody and a counter melody going on at the same time. So that's why it's difficult. And I think a good way to get started is to use open strings. So here's where, if you've never played a double stop in your life, you can still participate in this. In this video, I am going to offer another supplemental guide that covers sort of all the points that I'm making in the video, gives you a little bit of sheet music from which to work, and it goes along with the audio play-alongs. The sheet music that I'm going to be using is for the viola version, but it's also available in violin and cello. You can find them in the description. And the version I'll be using references the C major play along. So everything in the sheet music is in C major. So let's take a look at that guide. Here we go. Here is the guide. Playing double stops with DragonScales, supplemental guide for viola. So, one of the first things we can do to warm up, I'm a big fan of warming up. Jumping into double stops right away is a little scary. So one of the best things I think we can do to warm up our double stops is to play 2 strings at once. We're working on finding a balance in our bow between those 2 strings, where normally we have a range of vertical motion we can do and still stay on the string. Same thing even on an inner string. If you go too far, of course you hit another string. But when you're playing on 2 strings together, it's just, you either got it or you don't. You're either gonna play on 1 string or 2 strings. But you can still voice to 1 string or the other, meaning you can emphasize 1 string sound or the other, depending on a very subtle balance in the bow. So if I wanted to emphasize the low string, I would angle just slightly to the low string. If I wanted to emphasize the high string, I just lean slightly towards the high string. So what I'm going to do for this warm up is I'm going to be focusing on my tone, my sound, that balance between those two notes while the audio play along is happening. And that's going to give me harmonic context. Some of these notes are going to be really crunchy. It's going to be dissonant at times. It's going to be consonant at times too. And that's really great because it allows our ear to hear the types of sounds that we feel tension from, musically, not physically, musically, and the sounds that we feel a release of tension from. So here's what this sounds like. I'm just going to demo a little bit of this, the first few bars of the C major play along with two non-changing open strings starting on tonic. So I was really trying to shape my sound to make it make sense for me along with the audio play along. And I think it's really important that you develop a sense of phrasing, a sense of dynamics while you use these open strings. One next step to making this slightly closer to our intended goal of playing double stops with fingers is we're going to play two open strings on non-tonic. That's going to allow us to hear more dissonance. Sometimes when we're playing and we hear dissonance, we kind of freak out. I think it is possible to confuse dissonance with out of tune, and they're not the same thing. If we hear a minor second, there is a way to really tune it so that it's both pleasing and tension causing at the same time. So tonic, if you don't know what that means, it's just the sort of the root of the key or the scale. And when I say non-tonic, I just mean that note is not included in what we're playing. So I'm going to be playing a fifth up from what we just did, and here's a little bit about how that sounds. So that's tonic and non-tonic open strings. Anybody can do that. Now we move on to playing one stopped note and one open string. The idea here is that now we're introducing the left hand. We can start to tune our finger, just like we do normally, in the context of a very harmonically dense situation, meaning we're going to actually play two notes. One of them is an open string, so don't have to worry about intonation. We still have to focus on the balance, the voicing between those two notes. We still have to sort of micro-tune to make sure every chord feels just right. And we're still using our sound to make a phrase or a, tension and release in the sound. So I'll just demo this one, and then I'll explain right now the next one, which is playing two stopped notes. So we're gonna be putting both fingers down. It's a real double stop at this point. And we still have to focus all on the bow and the voicing and the phrasing and the intonation now. The good news is we're not gonna change notes yet. So we get the experience of playing two notes with our left hand without having to change. We can still get that harmonic context from the play along, and it's kind of one step closer to moving through a series of double stops that we're going to change. So that's the next progression. I'm going to just warp from one to the next as we go. These are also just example notes. You can pick whatever notes you want. Here we go. So this is going to be one stop note and one open string. So that goes on and on. Okay, you can do that with, again, any kind of combo of notes, any combo of fingers. You can warm up. This time I was just warming up fingers number 1 and 2 on my left hand. You can pick a different combination of notes that warms up a different set of fingers for you. So now we're warmed up, hopefully. If not, don't go on. Do not go on. If you want a challenge, now we're gonna go on. So this is now gonna be sort of maybe more advanced. These are, in my opinion, tricky to get in tune. When you're playing with chamber musicians, let's say in a string quartet, as I often do with public quartet, you tune to each other. There's no real such thing as fully set static intonation. You know, you're constantly listening, you're constantly adjusting, and generally we're listening down to the lowest voice, the cello, most of the time. In this situation, the play along is not changing. It is a cold, unfeeling computer. And if you really try to tune with it, it's going to be obvious when you're not in tune with it. And there's a whole video we can do on what that means in tune. But for the purposes of this video, I would say just use your ears and let your intuitive sense guide you through what in tune means. So we're going to be making now diatonic triads. And if you don't know what triads are, if you don't know what root position or first inversion, second version is, check out the arpeggios video, and I'll explain it in there. But here we're going to basically just move through different intervals in our left hand that make triads with the play along. So we're not going to be doubling any notes. We're going to be playing every note in the play along is a full chord, a full triad. And the most obvious one, of course, is just to provide the third and the fifth above the root. So if the audio play along is the root, we're providing the third and the fifth. The next one down in the second line there is we're going to be playing in fourths, which is a totally different hand shape. And sometimes you have to deal with the tritone, like in the third measure there. The F and B is a tritone. It's got a different shape to it, very different sound. And we're going to be making first inversion triads with that line. The next line is again thirds, but it's a different relationship with the play along. We're going to be making second inversion triads. And these notes are arranged specifically to make chords with this play along. You can transpose these to be able to play with other play alongs. And then we've got sixths on the bottom. This is now open voicing, which just means that as opposed to close voicing or close voicing here on the top, there's actually room to move one of the notes down and make the whole thing more condensed. Here, the E, this note here, that's the E, could be down an octave. So it could be C, E, G, but instead it's C, G, E, which means it's open voicing, and it does have a very different sound to it. It also lets us play in a different interval in our left hand, the sixth. I'm going to just skip ahead here and show you what else is on this page in the diatonic triads part. We can play in fifths. Now, if you've ever studied music theory or counterpoint or anything like that, you know that parallel fifths is sort of frowned upon. Well, in a lot of popular music, parallel fifths is a thing. And there's definitely a place for it. And because it's frowned upon in theory, in classical music theory, us string players don't often practice it. It's a really useful skill. Playing a fifth in tune, bang on, it sounds pretty awesome. So this is just an example of how to practice along, and what the play along provides is the third. So it's actually going to be the note in between your fifth. This is now a first inversion chord again, but in open voicing. And then the sixth in second inversion, open voicing. So that's that. We're going to go on to the next bit in a second. So I'm going to turn back the page if I can. There we go. And I'll just demo some of this. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I might switch lines here and there. So here is playing a diatonic thirds to make close voicing root position triads. Okay, so wasn't that in tune. I would have to practice this in order to make it sound at a level where I would feel comfortable playing in a concert, for example. How do I practice it? That's probably your next question. So there's a lot of ways to go about this. The reason why it's good to break down the practice process for some of these is because, again, it's a very dense situation. You're dealing with multiple fingers, multiple notes. It's kind of a lot going on. The easiest way to do this is to play each voice separately. No double stops, just literally each voice separately to tune it. So I'm going to tune the top voice first, which is in this case the G against the C, and then the B against the E. We're going to be in parallel perfect fifths. So here's how that sounds. I'm going to be using the same finger as I would when I was playing it. And then I would tune, work on that, get that really comfy. And then I would tune just the third, which is the bottom note by itself. No double stops. Work on that really hard. Make sure it's feeling really comfortable. You're trying to find a balance in your arm, hand, finger setup, right? You're trying to find comfort and balance in your left hand. Once that's good, I'm going to play the full left hand. I'm going to cover both notes, but I'm only going to do the bow on one of the lines at a time. And I think in this case, it makes more sense to tune the line that's in fifths first, because those are perfect intervals. They're generally a little bit easier to get in tune. Thirds are a little bit more up for grabs. So let's try that. Here we go. Doing left hand on both, bow on top line. Great, and then I would add the third back in. Let's see if it's any better. Let's see if it's any better. Maybe. Needs more practice. Okay, so those are the diatonic triads. After that, I figured let's get crunchy and go to some seventh chords. If you don't know what seventh chords are, we talked a little bit about them in the arpeggios video and also the improvising video. Normally a triad is the root, which is the first, the third, and the fifth. The seventh chord adds a seventh above all that, so a third above the entire stack. And so typical seventh chords include the major seventh chord, the minor seventh chord, the dominant seventh chord, and there's a few more that we won't get to in this video. Seventh chords have 4 notes in the chord. In all of the seventh chords in this guide, this supplemental guide, I've omitted the fifth. There's no fifth in the seventh chords. It's very common voicing to do. You pretty much need the third in order to understand the quality. Is it major or minor? And the seventh, you need the seventh of those on the seventh chord. So these are, we're going to be playing in seconds because that is another interval that we don't often get practice playing in, especially parallel seconds. Very odd feeling, but it's a really good thing to practice because, again, especially if we're playing Baroque music, a second to a third, kind of like suspension and resolution, is all over the place. So it's a really important skill to have. You can really build in that sense of tension and release with that kind of playing. So there's the first line here is playing in diatonic seconds to make close voicing first inversion seventh chords. That means that the play along on the bottom is the third of the chord. In fact, it's the third of the chord in the next line too. But in the next line, it's open voicing, and for that we play parallel sevenths, parallel diatonic sevenths. So here's how this sounds. I'm going to switch back and forth from the seconds to the sevenths. It's actually the same notes. It's just one is a second and one is a seventh. So here's a little bit about that. There's the seconds, didn't get to the sevenths, but you get the idea. And then I also wrote in just a little chord progression. This is sort of the most advanced thing here because it's the closest thing that approaches music, something you might find in music. Now, I'm not going to say that this is like particularly well written. It's just an example. I wanted to create a situation where you're going between different types of intervals in your left hand, and the relationship between the interval that you make and the play along keeps changing as well. So we're going to be doing triads, seventh chords, inversions, root position, open voicing, close voicing. It's all in there. And I think you can have fun with that section. If you want to get real nerdy, which I encourage that all the time, you can try and label these chords using Roman numerals and basically figured bass. So I think that's the end of this video. Let's get out of this view here. Again, this supplemental guide will be available in the description. You can get it for yourself. It's free. Again, I'll leave a little, just a little donate button in case you want to support me making more of this content. There's no pressure to do so, only if you feel moved to do so. And I really hope this has been helpful for you. Remember that double stops are at least twice as sort of dense, information dense, physically, aurally, than normal one note at a time playing. So be really patient, understand the distances and the spaces between your fingers as you're playing. Feel balance in your arm, wrist, and fingers at all times. If you don't feel balance, figure out why not, how you can get balance. And take a lot of breaks. It's really important to be gentle with this process, I think. Some people might disagree, but I think it is. And I think that if you can find a sound that really creates the mood of the double stop or the chord, in a lot of these cases, you'll be doing yourself a favor as well. So now I want to hear from you. Do you play double stops? Do you have a favorite interval? What's your favorite double stop to play? What do you find tricky about them? Are they easy? Let me know if in the future there's something specific you want me to address. We're going to be moving away from the DragonScales play-alongs as a sort of focus for these videos and into just general practice strategies and tips. Coming up, we're going to be doing a little mini-series on what I would call, the practice process, the learning process, how to be efficient in the practice room, and possibly a sight reading video. So that's in the immediate future. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you need, what you want. So I'll say thanks for watching and happy practicing.